Okay, this is the Constitution of the United States for the United States of America. And under Article 7, you have the last little clause here, and then it says done, which is part of the procedure to finish it. It says, in the year of our Lord, 1787, and of the independence of the United States of America, the 12th. So after the Constitution was passed, we have a document from 1788 and of our sovereignty and independence, the 13th. So the 13th year after the United States of America gained sovereignty. So the important thing I want you to see here, it says by the United States in Congress assembled. What happened to the United States of America in Congress assembled? After the federal Constitution was passed, people claimed that it repealed the Articles of Confederation, but it did not. This allowed for the federal government to create a state within the state under the federal Constitution. But under that same Constitution, the federal government agreed not to create more states within the state without the approval of the state legislature. And the federal government couldn't force itself in a state. It had to get approval from the state legislator to create this state within it, the federal state. And the federal states restricted to the federal lands. Okay, so this is their enacting clause by the United States in Congress assembled. We see in the preamble of the federal Constitution, we the people of the federal state, the federal United States, do these things, the listed things, in order to form a more perfect union, justice, tranquility, common defense, welfare, liberty. Do ordain and establish this Constitution, the federal Constitution, for the United States of America. We're not doing it to them. We're doing this to ourselves for the benefit of the states. Now let's look under the Articles of Confederation, where we have the states that came together, the delegates, or in other words, we the people of the United States of America in Congress assembled. So here we have, before the Constitution was written, we have the United States of America in Congress assembled. I'm trying to do this where I'm not shaking my camera around. The delegates of the United States of America in Congress assembled. This is the same as saying we the people of the states. And then we have here, this confederation shall be the United States of America. And they are the states. And the states retain sovereignty, freedom, and independence, power, jurisdiction, and right, which is not delegated to the federal state, the United States in Congress assembled. So these are the powers that the states gave the federal states, and then they wrote a constitution saying, yes, we're only going to do these things on the federal lands. So you have the Articles of Confederation, which created another little government inside America, a military government, the United States in Congress assembled. Okay, and then you have all legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States. And these people, we the people of the United States, we the people of the federal state, agree that we're going to do these things for the states. In other words, the military works for the states. Where else do we see this at? Article 1, Section 2. Or Article 2, Section 1 is what I meant. The president has the executive power of the United States of America because he's president over the federal people and he's president over the states also. And Section 2, the president shall be Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy of the United States, and the militia of the several states, the militia of the United States of America, when called into the actual service of the military. And we also see that the independence does not belong to the military or the United States. It belongs to the United States of America. So if someone is claiming power under this federal constitution, it has to have an enacting clause of what we see here in the Articles of Confederation, because this is where it was created. And so this is the enacting clause, the United States and Congress assembled. The enacting clause is powerful because it shows us by what authority someone intends to do something, or by what authority someone has to do something. And by their authority, we know who has to comply. So the United States in Congress assembled has the right to make laws for the Army and the Navy of the United States and militia of the several states when called into actual service of the United States. So the enacting clause tells us by what authority someone has to do something. If they don't have the authority to do it, they can't do it. And nobody's required to obey because they're doing it without proper authority. So the Constitution created a Congress of the United States, and the people in the military sit in those seats. Those are we the people of the United States. And the Constitution that created federal offices, they require people to meet certain qualifications. And those qualifications are that they should be a certain age, 25 for representative, and have 7 years, be a citizen of the United States. This means a citizen on federal lands, a resident on federal lands under contract to serve, either commissioned or non-commissioned officers or a troop enlisted. So they have to be 7 years military experience, 7 years a citizen of the United States. The enacting clause for the states is the delegates of the United States of America in Congress assembled, or what later became known as the Senate and House of Representatives of the United States of America in Congress assembled. And that enacting clause is codified in the federal or United States Code, the Federal Military Code, so that they know who has the proper authority to delegate powers to them. So Upshur, who was a Secretary of the Navy, I believe, said that Congress had no power to coerce these governments, nor could it exercise any direct authority over individual citizens, because we're not all citizens of the United States. Most of us are just citizens of the states. If you're a citizen of the United States, you're in the military. And he goes on to say some other pretty interesting things. A conclusive proof, however, of the true relation which the colonies held to the revolutionary government, even in the opinion of Congress itself, is furnished by their own journals. In June 1776, that body recommended passing of laws for the punishment of treason, and they declare that the crime shall be considered as committed against the colonies individually and not against them all, as united or confederated together. This could scarcely have been so if they had considered themselves a government de facto and de jure clothed with sovereign authority. This is the same book. This is Upshur's Our Federal Government. Although the powers actually assumed and exercised by Congress were certainly very great, they were not always acquiesced in or allowed by the states. Okay, so you have the states on one hand, the federal government on another hand, and the states individually. Not that we have three hands, but in a third way, in a third power. So you have the states individually, the states collectively, and then the federal government, which was the military. And all nations have to have a military. So the nation is the United States, a collection of states, and they are delegates of the United States of America in Congress assembled, and they created a military. And that military is the United States in Congress assembled when they convene for lawmaking purposes. The senators, by the way, mean seniors. Those are the higher ranks of the military, and they are to be older, wiser, I would assume also, and they are to have 9 years military power, military experience. No person shall be a senator who shall not have attained the age of 30 years and been 9 years a citizen of the military or citizen of the United States, and who shall not, when elected, be an inhabitant of the state for which he shall be chosen. So when you're in the military, there's a big difference between being in the military and being out of the military. And you know that when you're in the military, people who've never served in the military have no idea about these things. So if you're in the military, you may be an inhabitant of the state in which he shall be chosen, because it doesn't make any sense to be chosen and not be in the state where you were chosen. So to be an inhabitant, not an inhabitant of the state for which he was chosen, means he would be in the federal state. He would be on the federal lands. And if he's on the federal lands, that means he's in active service. So this is, in other words, saying that he would be 30 years old. He would be in the military. And he would be 9 years military experience. Okay, and like we said, representatives are 25 years old. 7 years, citizen of the military or in the military for at least 7 years, and not be off the federal lands, not be an inhabitant of the state in which he shall be chosen. So he should be on the federal lands. And again, if he's on the federal lands, he is active service. Now, the president does not have to be active service. There's a difference in the way they wrote it between a person that's in the military and a person not in the military, or they give the option that he can be in the military or retired or out of the military. Okay, so this is the one for the president. I can't highlight it, so. Okay, so no person except a natural born citizen or a citizen of the United States. So he's either a natural born citizen off the federal lands, or he's in the military on the federal lands, shall be eligible to the office of president. Neither shall any person be eligible to the office who shall not have attained the age of 35. So he has to be at least 35 years old. And he would have to have served at least 14 years on a military post or within, somewhere in the federal government, on some post somewhere, anywhere. During the Revolutionary War, they may have served not on a particular post, but in war. So they may have, military. The origin of the word is mile or mill, which means mile. So militaries, they walk and walk and walk and walk. So being in the military doesn't necessarily mean that you are on a federal post somewhere in particular. You may be assigned to a post, but you could be located anywhere. Now they're saying that no person except a natural born citizen or a citizen of the United States at the time of the adoption of this Constitution. So you have to be natural born or on the federal land serving in the military. And if you served in the military, you have to have at least 14 years within the military. So what does we the people mean? We the people means the people in the military. They're going to do these things. This is what the military does. They establish justice. They keep our courts safe. Okay, they keep justice secure. They keep the peace. That's what tranquility is. The common defense, of course, spelled with a C, not with an S. Promote the general welfare, because they keep us in a state of tranquility. They're supposed to anyway. And secure the blessings of liberty. So if we're not at war, we're at rest, we're at peace, we're tranquil. Okay. And they do it for us, for themselves, and for the future. And they establish this Constitution. They establish it saying this is what we're going to do on federal lands. And we're going to do it for the benefit. We do these things for the benefit of the United States, for the United States of America. The states, all the states collectively, because it can't say for the states. It might be interpreted as being each state individually. And the United States, the military, has no loyalty to, is not supposed to have a loyalty to individual states. The militia can, but not when they're called into service of the United States. When they're called into service of the United States, they're in the military and they're to have loyalty to all the states. That's part of what their oath says. Their oath says they have loyalty to all the states. So they call it the United States of America. The military cannot have loyalty to one state and not another state. That's not what their purpose is. Their purpose is as a national military. As a national military, they have loyalty to all the states, and they are called the United States. Okay. So this is part of our constitutional class for the requirements. And I've added in here enacting clause because I don't think you can really understand what the requirements are for a military Congress without understanding the enacting clause. Here the enacting clause is we the people of the United States. And I showed that to you also here. This is the enacting clause that was used after, a year after or so. It's the day of September. Yes, September. So this is a year after the Constitution was signed by the United States. And here they were doing an article of a treaty with the Cherokees, and that was part of their job as a military representative government to make treaties. Okay, so it says here, the citizens of the United States within the limits of the United States of America. Okay, now, there's also some strange ideas about citizens of the United States and where these people were, because they weren't all just on federal lands. Some of them were off federal lands working not on military posts, but in lands purchased by the federal government inside one of the states. And that land was to be used for growing crops and raising cattle so that the federal government could feed and clothe the troops. Clothe because they grew cotton also. But we had issues. The federal government had issues. See, these are citizens of the United States, federal citizens working on those territories that were not military posts, but were used to grow crops and raise cattle for the military that the state allowed the federal government to have possession of. The people, the military guys, these young military troops and stuff, would make alcohol. And that's why the federal government had to pass laws against prohibition, because their agreement with the state did not include using the lands to make alcohol, because then you have the military getting into a situation of commerce, because they were taking those alcohols and selling them to the people in the states, the United States of America, right? In one of the states. And so the federal government had to make laws against its federal citizen using some of the state lands that was given to the federal government for food and clothing for military purposes, make laws against them using crops or whatever they use, corn and whatever, potato, to make alcohol to sell. That's what prohibition was. Now today, people just believe that the federal Constitution took over the constitutions of the state and did away with or repealed the Articles of Confederation, and they did not. The federal Constitution was the agreement between the federal government and the state as to what the federal government would do on particular federal lands. So there are things that the states collectively said the federal government could do generally, and then there are things particular that the federal government needed to do on federal lands that the states would not interfere with. So I don't know if you realize it, but the state has no authority over federal lands except for those things that it expressly reserved, like the right to serve process on a military person who commits a crime off federal lands and then runs back to federal lands, or things that have to do with pollution, like not polluting the waters that run through the federal lands and then back into the state. When I say state or federal, I mean the federal government has jurisdiction or lawmaking power, legislative authority over the federal lands, and the states have jurisdiction, lawmaking power, legislative power over the state lands. But since you have federal lands inside state lands, you have to have some order. You have to have some agreement. But you also have a state who has to protect its citizens, state citizens. So when the federal government is polluting the water and then that water runs through the state back to the farms where farmers use the water to water crops or ranchers use it to water their cattle, and it's polluted, now we have an issue of the federal government and the state have to go somewhere to some court to hash out their jurisdiction. And that's why we have Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court is not because people of the states necessarily, for all the purposes that they do now, go to fight over constitutional issues, because the Constitution, for the most part, doesn't even apply to people of the states. It doesn't apply to people not on federal lands. It applies to the people on the federal lands and the federal government, unless the people on the federal lands or the federal government does some kind of injury or harm to the people of the states, in which case the state has an obligation to protect its citizens and its lands against the federal government. So when there's an issue between federal lands and state lands, it can go all the way up to the Supreme Court. When there's an issue between someone on federal lands and someone off federal lands, it can go all the way up to the Supreme Court. But the Supreme Court doesn't necessarily hear cases between two citizens of one state over a federal issue. Okay, so this is the enacting clause. These are the people of the United States. These are some of the people of the United States, of the military, by the United States and Congress assembled. Okay, so a citizen of the United States within the limits of the United States of America. So if they're on a military post or off a military post, they're within the limits of the United States of America. Unless they're overseas, of course. And then this is just, again here, the United States and Congress assembled. This is the exact same thing that the federal Constitution says. We, the people of the United States. We, the people of the United States. These are the people of the federal government. These are not state people. All legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States. We are not all citizens of the United States. We are only citizens of the United States if we join the military or we're in the militia and are called into actual service, and then in which case we're subject to the jurisdiction of the military, the United States. All right, so this is part of our Constitution class that we have here. And remember, United States and Congress assembled is not the United States of America and Congress assembled. It's not the same thing. These are the states all together collectively. This is the military under the Constitution. If you're not in the military and you're not on federal lands, you have nothing to do with the federal Constitution unless you go on to federal lands and commit a crime, or the federal government commits a crime against you. And people who are sitting in offices and they're using the federal Constitution and they don't meet the requirements of being a federal congressional member, a federal senator, representative with the required age and years of military service, and in the military, or in the case of the president, 14 years, and either in or out of the military. If they don't meet those requirements, they're not sitting in constitutional offices. And they can say, well, we're using the Constitution, or the Constitution allows us to, and they can say whatever they want because they don't actually have any power. I can say that I'm Santa Claus, but you don't have to believe me. So I can't fly a sleigh, or, I don't have reindeer or anything like that, but I can still say that I'm Santa Claus. But then you would look at me like I was crazy. And we should start looking at these people like they're crazy, because there's people sitting in offices saying they have constitutional power, but they're not sitting in offices actually created by the Constitution, and therefore their so-called power is void. And the founders knew this was going to happen. They've written about things void. Any law made by anyone pretending to have federal power, or sitting in a pretending to sit in a office created by the federal Constitution, anything they do is void. That's why they wrote about this, because they knew. That's why they said it right here. We, the people of the United States, and the powers are granted to Congress of the United States, and these are their requirements. This is why they wrote all this stuff, so that we would know. And we're supposed to be vigilant, and we're supposed to be smart, and we're supposed to keep up and understand who is and who is not. And when somebody is not and they're pretending they are, we're the ones that are supposed to, yell out usurper and point at them and tell them to get out. But nobody does that. Nobody does it anymore, and that's why we're where we're at today. It's not, anytime you have power, you're going to have people wanting to pretend that they have that power, right? I mean, we know that. Okay, so there you have it. I'll close this video, and I have more videos on the way. So like, share, and subscribe.